next guest is Starr Sackstein. She is a recovering perfectionist who is an assessment reforming enthusiast. Starr just started her role as a Massachusetts State Coordinator for Educators Rising and the COO of Mastery Portfolio, an edtech startup committed to helping schools move to standards-based communication. Additionally, she works with teacher teams to engage students in the learning process, advocate for personal growth, and effectively use student data to drive instruction. She was a high school English and journalism teacher for 16 years and a lead humanities learner for 2 years, a publisher and developmental editor, and a social media manager. Starr is also an author, blogger, and speaker committed to changing the way we do assessment nationally and globally. You can learn more about her work at her website, mssackstein.com. When Starr isn't advocating for students and educators, she is a mom and partner looking for the next adventure. Well, welcome to the podcast, Starr.
Thanks, Tina.
I've been following your work for quite a while, and we just talked about you combining a little bit of work with also speaking at a conference, but also going to visit the place you were at. So we'll talk a little bit more at the end of the podcast about what you do in terms of speaking topics and some of the things you have planned for this spring and summer. But let's start off with the question I ask everybody at the beginning. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Oh man, I would say that during the earlier part of my career while I was in the classroom, that was sort of like a daily struggle. But I'll focus a little bit more on my current role in being in the trenches with the teacher teams that I work with and what that looks like. One school in particular comes to mind where we had some leadership disagreement, we'll call it. And as an outside consultant working with a team who has different ideas about how things should be done from the leadership in the building, it creates a tension, especially when I find myself siding with the teachers because I agree with what they're saying and it makes perfect sense to me and not not necessarily understanding where the leader is coming from and why they're treating their staff the way that they are. So, like having really frank conversations with the folks I'm working with directly, the teachers, but then also having a direct conversation with the principal and hoping that she could maybe see, from my perspective, the more global issue of what the discord was doing to the team and how that was actually impacting the students as well, because the students were acutely aware that when this principal came into the classroom, the dynamic that was happening. And I think that it was hurting the growth that they were making in a lot of different ways because this particular teacher team had so much joy in the work that they were doing. And the fear that ended up becoming compounded by this leader, um, unfairly, I will say, making some assertions and changing rules for certain people really created a hostile environment. So, I mean, I worked with that team for many years and saw it kind of like do this, high and low sort of experience. And I'm grateful now to know that everything is sort of worked out and they've sort of found a way to meet the students' needs, really employ some very wonderful student-led um, elements to what they're doing in their spaces, as well as holding each other up as a team. And that's so important to me as an outsider who works with teams now, having them come together and seeing me as an ally that could sometimes say the things that they cannot say to their people is something I take kind of really seriously because the kids' needs are what has to come first. And sometimes our personalities get in the way of those really important decisions. And we don't realize it right away.
Yeah.
And, the damage gets done like that.
Yeah, and it's an interesting perspective to hear you as a outside consultant, kind of needing to be that in between person because they're feel for their jobs sometimes when there is that conflict with their boss but be able where you were then able to be the advocate for those teachers and as you said it worked out but it was a bit of a trench along the way so. Um, I talked in the bio about, so you're working now in several different roles, but one of them is being the COO of Mastery Portfolio. So talk to me a little bit about what got you started with Mastery Portfolio and just the student assessments and non-traditional testing as well.
Sure. So there's two different stories. So I was involved with non-traditional student learning and assessment well before I got involved with Mastery Portfolio. I started doing that in my classroom, I would say almost 15 years ago at this point. It's kind of crazy
Okay.
when I think about how much time has passed since all that work started. And it started with my child being in a school that did standards-based grading and seeing the way they reported learning and being very ready to make a change myself. And then doing national board certification and seeing the depth of reflection that was required and how much that helped me improve as a learner myself and an educator, and wanting to bring those opportunities to my students without judging them in any one particular way. And that's when I started writing. I wrote Hacking Assessment, which is probably the book that most folks know me for first. And my Ed Week blog all started happening at the same time, which is how Mastery Portfolio kind of got introduced to me. My current partner, Constance Boro, her and her teacher team, she was a leader in a small private school in Ohio, and they read Hacking Assessment and were trying to find a grade book that supported the work that they were doing. And they kind of broke Google with the spreadsheets that they were creating to do that. And someone had suggested to her, why don't you just build a web app to do the work that you couldn't find? Like, there were no other tools that were doing all the things she wanted it to do. So they started building this tool, and when they were about a year in, she reached out to me to have me look at the tool. And through a series of conversations, we had this opportunity where she asked me if I wanted to work. They were looking for a COO and if I wanted to be a partner in the company. And I thought it was like the best opportunity ever. A company of folks who were inspired by the work I was doing in the classroom, and this opportunity to help build the tool I wish I had when I was doing the work in the
Yeah.
classroom myself. So being able to be a voice of knowing the struggles I had trying to modify the tools we were using in our school. And I have a very unique gift of finding loopholes and exploiting them and trying to figure out even the software we were using in New York City public schools at that time, like contacting them directly to figure out how I could get it to do what I wanted it to do, even though it was different than all the folks that were in my building as well. So Mastery Portfolio is this phenomenal opportunity to support schools or individual teachers who are looking for that tool that is going to support this alternative assessment sort of paradigm, whether it's competency-based, standards-based, mastery learning, whatever your school is calling it, the tool supports that.
Yeah, and like you said, I think a lot of what teachers are concerned about when they're going to standards based or mastery based is like their grade book, like you said, the LMS.
Mhm.
I've worked at one school that had that about 10 to 12 years ago, and that was our biggest issue was getting our SVG to align with the Infinite Campus. Um,
Oh, Infinite
so
Campus.
yeah, so I assume when you were already kind of starting with standards based grading, like you said, 15 years ago, were you kind of going through the same thing and trying to get it to align with your
Yeah,
LMS?
so like New York City had its own tool called, first it was Pupil Path and then it became Scheduler, and
Okay.
they did have a standards-based dashboard, but my school wasn't using it. So even getting them to turn it on for me, so because obviously as a teacher in the building, I didn't have the admin access to turn that kind of stuff on. And I started playing with the back end of it, trying to figure out a way where I wouldn't have to put a grade in to get the feedback to save. And then if I could get it to align to specific outcomes that I was trying to get kids to track over time, whether I was at the time using, Common Core or the Next Gen Learning Standards or the ISTE standards for my journalism class, which is what I used for them. Just trying to get it so that the kids had the language of, first of all, what they were being assessed on and why they were being
Sure.
assessed on it, but then, specific feedback that aligned with those particular competencies and standards that we were working on.
And so mastery portfolio, what's different about it that besides all these other apps that people have maybe heard of or used in the past, what makes Mastery Portfolio more humane?
Okay, so the mastery book, one like we're very mission driven, so there are certain things that our tool will not do that a
Okay.
traditional school, for example, you cannot put a zero in the dashboard.
Okay.
Those kinds of traditional numbers aren't ever going to be in our dashboard. You have a proficiency scale that is completely flexible to what a school wants to use, what your language is, how you're defining that, however many levels you have at your school. So that's like number one. You dictate what the weight of each of those proficiency levels are, how many
Okay.
there are, and what colors go. Because the
Okay.
dashboard's like very, very colorful, so that when kids look at it, they could see growth over time and they understand what the colors mean. Something else that's unique about it is that in order to put an assignment into the dashboard, it has to align with standards or competencies. You can't save it to the book, to the progress book, unless it's actually aligned to something specific.
Okay.
Then we have student reflection and self-assessment directly in the teacher dashboard. So the student, if I set an assignment as self-assess, the student gets a notification that when they're done with the learning, they have to self-assess themselves and use the rubric to justify why they're giving themselves what they do. And then instead of that being in different places in the tool, it shows up directly in the teacher's dashboard with the assignment. And I could read what the student wrote and decide, do I agree with this student's assessment of themselves? And if I do, I could just hit accept, and then it'll change my side of that particular assignment to match the students. And if I don't agree, there's an opportunity for me to attach a rubric, give specific feedback, and have a conversation with the student. Or if it's a wider gap than just like one level, then it's an opportunity for me to confer with the student and say, hey, I want to understand a little better what you're seeing and why we're so far apart and what that looks like. So that's another thing that's super unique about the tool. And then with all the pieces the students self-assess and upload, they have the opportunity to select the pieces they want to have in their portfolio, which
Okay.
also gets saved on the student side of that. So when they're talking about their learning, they could see all their work either by standard or competency or by pieces that they've put in there and how it aligns to different standards. So those are some things that are unique to what we do. Plus, we're just, since we're so small, we're kind of nimble. And if there's a specific ask that a school has, we could go straight to our developers and just be like, hey, how easy would it be to have this feature be brought in? For example, we have a widget now where students could set goals directly in the dashboard as well. So, like, once a student sets a goal on a particular standard, it comes up in the teacher's dashboard as a little star. So then I could group kids based on their own goals. And so that's another feature that I really enjoy and I think is good and puts more of the ownership on the student, and really makes it more of a partnership. The dashboard isn't just the teachers. It doesn't have to be. It could be a shared experience with the student.
And is there a lot of training that you need to do for the students for them to be able to use it?
Not a lot. And we would get on a call with, like, I mean, I would have no problem getting on Zoom with a classroom if they wanted to roll out the portfolio piece and didn't feel confident do that. We usually give training to the teachers on how to do it, but we would also do it with the students if the teacher didn't feel confident rolling it out to them the first time, and then record it so that they have that for students when they need to go back in the future and have to do it on their own.
Definitely sounds like an all-round tool for students to upload and show work and have that portfolio. I know a lot of schools have worked on some form of digital portfolio, but I think it depends on kind of what they're looking for in terms of like graduation competencies. And with the schools that you've worked with, is that usually adopted by the whole school, or in some spaces has it been just adopted by certain departments?
So we've had both. We even like the free version of what we offer, which doesn't have all of the like higher level student engagement pieces. Like, so if a single teacher wanted to just have a mastery dashboard, you could sign up for a free basic account and be
Okay.
able to do that for yourselves. So we've had ranges from single folks, whole departments, and then micro schools, and then whole school communities. I would say that doing this work always works a little better when you have school, full school sort of support and buy-in because when you're a single teacher or even a single department and you're getting one message as a student from that particular teacher in that particular department, and then you're going back into traditional paradigms throughout your day as well, there's definitely discord among why are we doing this? How come more of my teachers aren't doing it? And if I'm more successful in that space, why can't I have that opportunity in all of my classes? So there could be an equity problem if you're only doing it in one space. But I also say that once I started doing the mastery learning, it was really hard for me to even conceive of going back to something traditional. I just saw so much success in my students that I never wanted to go back. And if that meant I had to be on my own in whatever role I was in a school, I was okay with that because I really truly believe it's what's best for kids.
Yeah, so teachers who are interested, you'll share at the end how they can access the tool and maybe
Sure.
try to use it first. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of your recent publications. So you published three books last year, well, two books, and then you have one coming just shortly next month as we record this in January. So student-led self-assessment and making an impact outside the classroom were both published last year. You have solving school challenges coming up. Talk to me a little bit about the solving school challenges. Does it talk a lot about the grading piece or just kind of culture? What are some of the things people can
It
look for in the
actually,
book?
it's 10 chapters that tackle some of the most major problems in education
Okay.
right now. So, chapter one is all about retention. We talk about teacher retention, leadership retention, staff retention, even student enrollment with how enrollment's been going down. And what's
Yeah.
super unique about our book, there are four of us who co-authored it. Dr. Alexandra Lang, Dr. Tiffany Turner Hall, and Dr. Marianne DeRosa, and myself. And basically, what we wanted to do was both help solve common issues, but also elevate folks who have solved it. So
Yeah.
instead of us being the only folks who provide solutions, we have schools, individual educators, and programs that have successfully solved some of these issues. So you are both getting a celebration of the people who contributed to help other people solve problems that they've found solutions to. And then there's also research that supports the other ones. So if we didn't have a success story, we found research to support the solutions we provided. So that if you were taking this to your school team, you could be like, it worked for this community here. And if the profile of the community is rural in the Midwest, and you are also rural and in the Midwest, you might be more inclined to try a solution that worked for a community alike situation. Or, big city, we have a very broad reach in terms of like every kind of school, independent, public, private, there are a couple of higher ed examples, but K-12 mostly, couple of international examples as well. And anybody who could solve one of those hard problems, like the different chapters, like I said, the first one's retention. The second one is all about money in schools. The third one is about technology. Fourth is innovation. Fifth is professional learning. Sixth is mental health. Wow, it's been a while. I think the seventh one, oh man. Oh, this bad one, I don't remember. It goes all the way up through 10, and grading is actually addressed as problems in a couple of different areas.
Okay.
But grading and assessment specifically comes up in the later chapters that talk about like benchmarking. Like there's data, there's one that talks about data and PLCs and all the ways that we collect data and how we may be misusing that information or all the things that come with those challenges as well. And then we try to reimagine education at the end. Like in a perfect world, what could education be? And that's sort of how we leave it, like this homage to possibility in the future.
Yeah, I think that that's a great all-around book for people to pick up as they plan for next school year. And some things that just in the area I live, like that lowered enrollment, but also at the same time, because I live in a district that's such a huge geographical area, they are also they finally were able to pass a bond to build a few new schools in newer neighborhoods. So while they're having to repurpose some buildings in the neighborhoods that have an older population, they also have the challenge of like getting mod money passed to build new buildings. So I think like, yeah, no matter where you are, there are going to be some of those challenges, with the retention piece, the mental health, definitely, the finances. So yeah, definitely. I'll put the link to the book in the show notes. People can pick that up. You also co-host a podcast with Crystal Frommer, and I've had Crystal on the podcast as well. It's called Learner Center Spaces. Tell me a little bit about it.
So what I love about Learner Centered Spaces podcast, it's kind of like this. It's very much like we have a set of questions that we ask, or at least start out with. But if somebody says something interesting, we kind of go off on the tangent that the guest has. And basically what we're hoping to do is present a lot of different ways learner-centered spaces could look. Like how those spaces are more indicative of student ownership of learning, different strategies people have used that have been successful for different populations of students, different um, like I'm thinking of a few, like our very first guest, I think, was Rick Wormley, like a couple of years ago when we started. So we have had people like Rick, and Ken O'Connor was on a while ago. Um, I think Tyler Raplin was also on. So like Angela Stockman, a lot of folks that people will have heard of, but then also really amazing classroom educators who are doing great work from K to higher ed. We've had superintendents, we've had principals, we've had college professors. Most recently, a fourth grade teacher who's doing amazing things with student-led conferences in Massachusetts. She's lovely. And so there's really nice variety and just having these conversations with folks about really different initiatives they're doing in their own spaces that could help other people start their own learner-centered journey.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to go to for ideas, both for teachers and administrators. Again, as they're planning for next school year, as they're thinking about, student-centered learning, definitely getting more student involvement and students taking charge of their learning. To hear some of these things that these people you've talked to can share. You also write a blog, so tell me about the Career Confidential blog that you write.
So it's actually a column in the Cap'n magazine. It's online, and then when we have our printed version, they choose the one they think is going to work best. What I love about Career Confidential is I'm kind of like Dear Abby for educators. So people write to me about the challenges that they're having in their classroom, and then I do my best to anonymously answer their challenges. I recently wrote one about a teacher who's from the northern part of the country moving to the south. And I believe the person is in the LGBTQ community. And so the very big shift to religion in schools and lack of community around LGBTQ folks and safe spaces to be in that space it was an interesting challenge to kind of help solve because I know that if I was in a school that was actively talking about the Bible or God, it would probably make me really uncomfortable too as a public school teacher who isn't like I'm Jewish, so I ascribe to a different belief system. And I have to imagine in New York City public schools, there are so many different beliefs that that's just not something that would be okay in any of the spaces I taught in or worked in. So it was, I thought, a really meaty topic to kind of think about. I've had other people also ask about parent communication, standards-based grading not working, or like some more typical stuff. I've had nearly retired teachers asking about how they could stay engaged in education once they leave the classroom. So it really has stretched from like every end of the spectrum. Sometimes it's a small challenge that somebody's trying to solve, and sometimes it's like a systemic problem that's like, how do I make this decision or how do I be a part of a solution? Um, and I've really enjoyed it. I started writing the column in September, so it's been it comes out once a week. And if folks have
Okay.
problems that they want to share, I'm happy to they could email me or they could fill out the form that I have online directly.
Yeah, no, it definitely sounds like a great place for people to get anonymous feedback or feedback from you and submit something anonymous of a challenge. Like the example you shared is, very relevant today. And just for people, like you said, if they're having a challenge with parents or, starting something new and a new initiative at their school or trying to, maybe get admin on board with something that they want to start in their school. So I'm going to put the link to that in the show notes. And talk to me a little bit about what type of offerings you do. So you do stuff with Mastery Portfolio, but you also do just based on your experience, a little bit of just independent consulting. So when you go into schools, you said you're more of a job embedded consultant. Tell me about kind of what that is.
So like a keynote's great and I do keynotes, but like there's something to be said for being a part of the implementation of the work that you're doing. And it's nice to inspire people with a keynote, but I think it's far more important to be with them, as you said at the beginning, in the trenches as they're doing the work, getting messy, problem solving. So like I'm really invested in building relationships with the teams that I have. And over the years, I would say that most of the teams I have I retain for multiple years because if you're doing any kind of assessment initiative, it's not something you're going to get done in 1 year. And the better I develop relationships with the school, the better professional learning opportunities I could provide, whether it's like whole school PD, where we're all sitting in rooms doing different things, or it's small teams, or it's coaching. I do learning walks with schools, so I'll go into classrooms, I'll kind of really get a sense of what's going on, and then I'll help them target different goals. With starting with small tweaks, I've also helped districts create curriculum, help them bring different assessment models in with reflection and building rubrics and project-based learning, all the things that you would think of when you think of a student-led space, depending on what the school is starting with. So I don't like to discount anything that they bring to the table to begin with. So I really try to understand their paradigm and then I try to see where we're going to get the most bang for our buck in terms of where to start, what to implement, and then what the ongoing plan is so that the teachers feel really supported. And it could be as easy as they need resources, and that takes a lot of time. So I could curate resources for them if that's something they want. I could provide feedback on assessments that they're creating. I could participate in their PLCs so I could see the data that's coming through and help them with strategies for specific challenges that they have. And then later when the folks, reach out to me about grading policy reform, which is another thing that I help districts on, whether it's board presentations about changing the language around learning in classrooms, parent town halls, all of the things that you would need to really implement an assessment or curriculum-based initiative and from there kind of supporting all along the way, including student focus groups, which are like my favorite thing to do. I love to talk to kids about how they feel about their learning experiences, what works for them, and what they'd like to see more of in their spaces, and then help their school make that happen.
Yeah, and like you said, the student focus group, they don't always have the capacity within the school staff to get that work done, and like bringing in somebody who can work specifically with some groups of students and get that information out to the school is great. And like you said, you have a variety of things that you can help schools with. So I'll make sure that people are able to get your information at the end. So you also have uh, just coaching and speaking topics. I'm going to link in the show notes your TED Talk. You said it was recorded 9 years ago, but it was kind of the beginning of your journey to give up grades.
Mhm.
But also, we're talking more in the last couple of years about equitable assessment. And what do you think might be changing in 2025, especially in the southern states? Like you said, you live in Florida, so how might assessment be affected?
Well, I know that there are certain buzzwords that are
Yeah,
kind of taboo with the incoming administration and thinking about in the last few years since COVID, DEI has been a really big thing and getting that equitable stance so that folks have what they need to be successful and acknowledging that not every child at home has the same support, the same technology, the same access to a lot of
yeah,
things. So trying to build as much into the school day as possible. I think in 2025 in Florida, if I plan to work here, I'm going to need to really understand the language of like what not to say. Part of my challenge as a person who's always been a little subversive in terms of really wanting to make big change that make traditional educators a little uncomfortable sometimes. Like when I say I didn't grade my students, that's something that usually gets people a little like uneasy. Like, oh, are you going to come here and tell us that we can't give grades to our kids anymore, too? That's not my call to make. So when I go to districts, regardless of what my personal beliefs are about these things, I'm working within the confines of what is appropriate for them. And I
yeah,
would never make a school system feel badly about where they are on that spectrum. That's not really good business for me to be like,
yeah,
you start shaming them for the things that they're doing. So I do think that I'm going to need to be more careful about the language in particular until I know who I'm talking to, making sure that it's friendly to any audience, thinking more about community as opposed to equity, which I think sends the same message, but sends it in a different way.
yeah, yeah. No, I think that's good how you say it. Like it's you're giving the same information. You're just choosing wording to be appropriate to uh, their area, right? The geographical area or political area where you're working. So I think everybody, no matter where they're located, wants the same outcomes for their students, right?
Of
So
course.
uh, we're all working to make sure kids are able to access, um, what they need to learn, but also to be graded in an equitable way as well. So we've had a great conversation today around your work with Mastery Learning, the podcast, your books, and just what you do on a daily basis and all the things. Out of everything we've talked about, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Um, that all kids can, and that regardless of where you are in your own education journey, there's always an opportunity to learn more and include students more as partners in your learning. Um, it took me till my very last year in the classroom to really start doing the most dynamic things that I was doing, co-creating curriculum with my students. And it took a really long time to get confident enough in myself to let go of all of that control. So, regardless of if you're 2 years in the system, 10 years in the system, 20 years in the system, there's always new stuff to try. And as educators, it's really important that we stay on top of the research and keep stretching ourselves,
Yeah,
modeling that lifelong learning, because we can't preach it if we're not doing it ourselves.
that's so important. Well, where can people connect with you and find you online?
So I'm mostly on LinkedIn. I started on Blue Sky as well. I'm no longer on the platform formerly known as Twitter. It was a sad loss because it was a long time building that space, but mostly LinkedIn and Blue Sky now, and then my website as well, mssaxstein.com, and basically branded the same thing on all of it, Ms. Saxstein, except for LinkedIn, which is my whole name.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I'll include those in the show notes. And thank you so much for being my guest on the Out of the Trenches podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me.